Okay, everyone, it's 1:05. I've heard from most everyone that is ready to get going. So I'm going to have to go ahead and start. It looks like Marshall County may still be getting set up. So hopefully this gets worked out here momentarily. If not, Bob, I'm going to start off with the Joe Bakovitz's state chemist update, which I believe the PowerPoint presentation is online. So if you miss anything, maybe you could fill the folks in here at the conclusion real quickly. So welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. My name is Andrew Westfall. I'm a Purdue Extension educator located in White County, Indiana. I wanted to thank, first of all of our presenters, of course, this afternoon for joining us, but also wanted to thank our host counties out there. It's no small feat to gather folks in a enclosed area right now. So be sure and thank them for helping you get your credits and obtain this information. So the first presenter this afternoon is Joe Bakovitz from the Office of the Indiana State Chemist. And I'm actually going to be playing a video of Joe's. Be warned, will be a point where some of the information after we recorded the presentation is already a little out of date. So I'm going to skip over a slide, just a heads up on that. And as he concludes on some dicamba information, there is some new information available on that. Joe is on the call, so he will be able to fill us in on that. And our next presenter, Bill Johnson, will also be discussing dicamba at length, I'm sure. So we should be all privy to the dicamba information by the end of the day. So with that, I'm going to start Joe's video. Again, Joe is with the Office of the Indiana State Chemist, and he's going to be just providing us an update and a review of some things that are going on in their office. So bear with me here a moment. I'm going to get this video started. It may come through a little quiet. I've got it up as high as I can go on my end. So you may need to, if you're just joining us, crank up your speakers as best you can. And I'm going to give this a go.
Welcome to the 2020 Private Applicator Recertification Update from the State Chemist Office. My name is Joe Bakovitz, and when we get to the end, if you have questions, there should be some contact information there for you. This year obviously has been memorable in a number of ways, one of which was our longtime leader. There actually is and was somebody that's actually the state chemist for the last 11 years or so. It's been Dr. Robert Waltz. He retired at the end of May. He saw the state chemist office through a number of different problems. Some of you may remember back to Imprellis, which was a lawn care chemical back in 2011 that caused a lot of injury across landscapes all through the U.S. And then for the last 3 or 4 years, we've had our problems with dicamba, and his decisions with our office were firmly rooted in science, and he developed a long-term plan for our office. So I was very sorry to see him go. We, along with Purdue University, instituted a nationwide search, and just recently, in fact, it just happened, Dr. Marc LeBlanc has accepted the position as the new state chemist. By law, he's appointed as a professor at Purdue, but also has to be appointed by the governor, and those things have taken place. I have not met him in person yet. You might imagine that with the stuff going on, but we have had an online meeting where most of us have had the opportunity to meet him at this point. Well, what happened in 2020 besides COVID that we're all just trying to move past when we can? Um, Around May 8th, there was a really hard frost in central and northern Indiana that caused widespread injury to landscape plants, including some in my own yard where I'd never seen injury to them before. And this photo actually depicts frost injury on the yews in my front yard. And along with what we all saw in our own landscapes and some alerts from the Purdue Plant and Pest Diagnostic Lab, uh, we thought that it was possible that some of our early drift complaints might not really be drift complaints. And indeed, for probably the first month, most, if not all, of our supposed drift complaints actually turned out to be frost injury and not really related to any kind of uh, pesticide or herbicide application. One of the big things that happened in 2019 was that some agricultural organizations um, went to the Indiana legislature and attempted to get a revised and heightened civil penalty structure passed. That didn't happen. Uh, the legislature did come back to the Indiana Pesticide Review Board with instructions to get all categories together, input from all categories, and come up with some recommendations for the legislature on what they should pass as a revised civil penalty rule. And the Pesticide Review Board was able to successfully do that. They sent those recommendations on to the legislature, and it's now at the legislature as Senate Enrolled Act 438 as of the time of me recording this. They haven't acted on it, and I don't know where this is going to all come out, but just know that the review board has made its recommendations to the legislature, and we'll all see where this comes out at the end of the session. There has been a new core exam developed. We try to look at all of our exams about at least every 10 years. Any of our exams, and the core is no example, is developed with input from experts from your industry. In this case, since it's the core exam, which is relevant to all categories, there were people on this panel that put the exam together from most, if not all, categories. Um, there are some differences in this exam and therefore some differences in the manual, because we always have to make sure the manual matches what the exam is. So if you're sending someone to take the new core exam, and it is being offered now as of September 1st, we highly recommend that you purchase a new manual so that you're sure all of the information that they might need is available in the manual. Private applicator renewals have gone out. You probably have gotten them by now. Know that something that's different, we had to change and have changed our state law to mirror the federal law. And so as of January 1st of 2021, the minimum age for a private applicator will be 18. In Indiana, before it was 16, but now it's 18. So be aware of that. If you don't have all the PARPs you need and you can get them in before the end of the year, then please do that. and then go ahead and submit your renewal notice along with $20. If you can't get them all in, then you're going to have to retest by basically taking the new core exam. As usual, we conducted a number of what we call clean sweeps across the state. I believe we had 6 of them. They usually take place the end of July, beginning of August. We move them around so that all areas of Indiana get a chance to dispose of any old or unwanted pesticides that you might have. The pictures you're seeing on the screen are actually from this year's, so you can see we got a variety of things from roach control products that are fairly new to, if you look at that Aldrite can on the right hand side, first of all, if you see a can, you know that's old, and you see Shell Corporation on there, that can's been around for a while. So that's something good to get off just sitting on a shelf or in a barn or wherever it was and properly disposed of. And you can see there on the slide, this year we collected close to 40,000 pounds. Disposal is free up to 250 pounds. And then after that, I think it's only $2 a pound. So it's a good deal. If you still have something you think you might need to get disposed of, be looking for where the sites will be for 2021. That probably shows up on our website sometime in July. And now we have to talk about the elephant in the room. Did COVID-19 affect what the state chemist office did? Well, yes, although I think it did minimally when you look back. Some staff are now operating exclusively from home. I am one of those people that now operates exclusively from home. At least for the time being, our office and labs are no longer open to the public. All of the testing centers were shut down for 30 days, but have now all been reopened, along with a couple of extras. So there are actually more places where you can take exams than there was before everything was shut down. And if you don't remember, most of these testing centers are at Ivy Techs that are scattered around the state. We've gotten some questions about continuing certification hours or the PARPs. Are we going to extend the time for people to collect CCHs or PARPs? And at the time of this presentation, the answer to that is no. Only a few trainings were actually canceled, and there's been a ton of online opportunities for people to do PARPs. I actually went down to southern Indiana where people drove their vehicles into a parking lot and presenters were under a tent and presented live from that tent over an FM frequency. So extension educators have been great at finding ways to still offer PARPs to you. So at this point in time, there's probably not going to be any extension of that. If you need to look for online training opportunities, then I've got the website address there on this slide. Or if you go to our website or Purdue Pesticide Program's website, there's going to be a link to us, and you can find out where those opportunities are. One of the things that we did immediately when this whole COVID thing started was we suspended the requirement that you had to be a registered technician in order to be out making applications. So currently, and until the end of the year, you can be either a certified applicator, an RT, or nothing out there making pesticide applications. I'll say for hire pesticide applications. Um, if you're, what we did not suspend were the supervision requirements. So if you're an RT or if you're nothing, you still do have to be supervised by your certified applicator. They need to know how to contact that person. The RT or non-credentialed person has to have the right personal protective equipment and wear it, has to have access to the labels and follow them. And don't forget, um, certified applicators or private applicators, you're still the one responsible for supervising these non-credentialed people. So if they screw up, you're the one left holding the bag. So right now, and I realize things could change, but right now the state chemist office is very unlikely to extend um, our enforcement discretion on this registered technician thing past the end of the year. So unless something drastic happens, um, starting next year, these uncredentialed people are going to need to be either, if it's for hire stuff, they're going to need to be registered technicians. Our enforcement discretion for COVID has never included um, sales or distribution of a restricted use pesticide. Those still have to be purchased by a certified applicator or a private applicator. The supervision requirements are still in place, and you're still required to follow the label. Nothing was suspended on that. You'll see in bold there, I have false or misleading coronavirus labeling. I threw that in there because um, with it seems like almost any um, situation like this, there's always people out there trying to take advantage of it, and that's what's happened in this case. We spent a fair amount of time running down products and companies that were claiming, they had the super duper product that killed COVID on contact and kept it away for 90 days. And, again, as of the time of me making this presentation, there's nothing out there that does that kind of thing. At least that's registered with EPA, and that EPA, they've provided proof that that happens. So we have continued to do use inspection, and that is just where, if we see somebody out there making an application, we might talk to them. That's a use inspection. Or if you're a new business or we want to inspect your storage facility, that would be a use inspection. We've done some of those in person, but a fair number of those we've done by phone or email. And it actually turns out those are easier than, and probably less time consuming for you than if we show up to do them in person. So um, please, if you get contacted to do one of these virtual use inspections, cooperate with the investigator. If he asks or she asks to get photos of your records or photos of what your storage looks like, why, please cooperate and send that to him. Again, I think you'll find it's an easier experience in a lot of ways than if they go do this in person. When we are doing things in person right now, we're following, because we're at Purdue University and because it just makes sense, we're following Purdue University requirements. So we are going to show up and social distance. We are going to be wearing a mask. We're going to ask that you wear a mask also, and go from there. Our complaint investigations never missed a beat. Um, we did not defer or put off any of our complaint investigations. The only difference has been, again, we're following Purdue's COVID policy, so we do show up wearing masks. We try to get all the information from both the complainant and the respondent ahead of time, but if they want to meet with us, we do, we will meet, but again, we're going to wear masks and ask that you also wear a mask. As of the end of September, we ended up with 205 ag drift complaints. 72 of those were dicamba and 16 of those were aerial. That is, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, but that is substantially less than the last few years. Just a quick hemp update because I hear there's still interest in this. So 2020 was still a research year with no fee. You had to, if you were going to grow hemp, you had to find a cooperator, someone with extension to cooperate with and go that way. For 2021, it does look like there's going to be licensing fees in effect. And so the fees are $750 for a grower license, $750 for a handler license, and depending on what you do as a business or facility, you may need both of them. If you do more than just grow, if you also, um, you know, handle, change the product, press the oil, whatever in some way, you're going to need both of those licenses. The application is available online under the hemp section at our state chemist website. If you have questions on hemp licensing, the new person is Laura Fritz, and I've got her email address and phone number information on this slide. So if you want to take a picture with your phone or whatever, you can have that information in case you need it further down the line. I've also been asked to just remind you that there are new paraquat requirements out there. Whether there are still old products in the channel of trade or not, I'm not sure. The new labels were required to be in place on any new product that was produced at the end of 2019. So some of the changes is that now you have to be a certified applicator to purchase, mix, load, or apply this product. There is no supervision when it comes to applying paraquat now. You have to go through product specific training every 3 years. That training is not put on by the state chemist office. It's put on by the manufacturers or registrants of the products. Um, there has to be a record of that training. There's going to be closed systems for packaging some of this stuff. But just know there are a lot of new requirements out there for paraquat. Always, and again, some of the rest of them always store in the original container. That goes for any of these things, but again, paraquat has, it's highly toxic. Um, just a little sip can kill you. There's no antidote. So a lot of the new rules are aimed at trying to keep poisonings from happening, keep it off skin, put it in locked storage, not for storage or use around residential or public settings. So that means you don't go to the schoolyard and spray it in the fence row is, I guess, an example I can think of. So what's the state of dicamba? Um, As I record this, it's it's changing rapidly. We're not sure where it's going to end, um, and won't be sure until probably the middle of November or so. But right now, so just some things to remember in the meantime is that in Indiana, all ag use dicamba products that are at least 6.5% dicamba or more are restricted use pesticides. So that's most, not all, but most dicamba products. And the the I'm not talking about the four new ones that are over the top, that are labeled for over the top. I'm talking about the old dicamba products. And that's an Indiana only thing. So you're not going to be able to look at the label of these dicamba products and see that restricted use pesticide logo on the labels. You're just going to have to know that all of these products in Indiana, dicamba products that are over 6.5%, are restricted use pesticides. So those are only for sale or use by certified applicators. On these old products, supervision is okay for the old products, but not for the new products. So Ingenia, Fexapan, Extendamax, and Tavium, there's no supervision for those. Those you have to be a certified applicator. But the old products, it's okay to supervise on those. Remember, since they're restricted use pesticides, all of these dicamba products, the old and the new ones, you have to keep records for 2 years, restricted use pesticide records for 2 years for those. And the four new over-the-top products, Ingenia, Fexapan, Extendamax, and Tavium, have a bunch of additional record-keeping requirements. So remember, if you use these new products, there are extended record-keeping requirements for those. Fred Whitford from Purdue Pesticide Programs, along with the Extension Service, put together like a 2-page publication that has, I think, a record-keeping form in there for these new products. So be aware that it's out there and that that's a form you can use. In Indiana for 2020, we did institute for the first time a June 20th cutoff date. That appeared to work. Again, 1 year doesn't tell you things definitively, but what we can talk about is the number of drift complaints was down. Like I talked earlier, we had a total of 205 drift complaints. That's down substantially. 72 dicamba complaints is a little less than half of what we had last year. So whether that's attributable to the June 20th date or just the way the weather was, it may be too early to tell, but if you just look at the numbers, we had less than half the dicamba complaints we had last year. Interestingly enough, at least it's interesting to me, probably if you looked at what the violations were for these dicamba applications, the number one violation was people still made an application when the wind was blowing towards a susceptible crop. Really, that shouldn't happen because that's the very first thing you should do or remind yourself of when you go out to apply dicamba. Because if you go out to the field and there's a susceptible crop downwind, you're done. It doesn't matter what the wind speed is. If the wind is blowing towards a susceptible crop, you're done until the wind isn't blowing towards that susceptible crop. So remember, that's sort of the first thing that you should be reviewing when you go out to make these dicamba applications. So I'm sure you've all heard by now that last year, one of the things that happened is really close to the cutoff date for Indiana. In fact, the Ninth Circuit Court ruled on some lawsuits that were filed by, frankly, some were uh, farmer groups, some were environmental groups that had sued EPA and said that they never should have re-registered Ingenia, Fexapan, and Extendamax for 2020. And the court agreed with those lawsuits and basically vacated the registrations for those three products. And that, for a while, threw states and applicators into an unknown territory, but they were basically allowed to finish out their application season, at least in Indiana, um, and didn't necessarily have to dump all of those products. Now, the registration for Tavium wasn't included in that because when these lawsuits were filed, Tavium had not even received registration yet. So the registrants did appeal the decision of the court to vacate the registrations, but the Ninth Circuit Court denied their request to reconsider. So it basically stuck. Um, what has happened just in the last couple of days is that EPA has announced that they've re-registered those products for 5 years with some added things on the label, one of which is a June 30th cutoff date for soybeans nationwide. Now, where are we going to end up in Indiana with this? Are we still going to have a June 20th cutoff date? I don't know yet because we haven't even seen the actual labels for these products or had a chance to, had the Indiana Pesticide Review Board have a chance to look at all of the information yet. So we expect to have some kind of information out for you as applicators probably by the beginning of December or so. It may take a little longer than that, but I'm hoping we're going to have some viable information for you about what to expect from our office on the re-registration of these three products, Ingenia, Fexapan, and Extendamax. So stay tuned to our website, and of course we'll put out a news release probably through Ag Communications at Purdue once we figure out where exactly what we're going to do with these products in Indiana. With that, I've come to the end of my slides. Again, if you have questions or comments, you've got my email address up there and my office number. Feel free to get a hold of me if you have any questions. Hope you're having a good harvest season and that you have a great year next year.
Okay, thank you, Joe, for that information. As I mentioned, we will have some further dicamba information forthcoming. And also, I would remind everyone, if there are questions or if you're trying to track updates on that, to please follow the Office of the Indiana State Chemist website for the latest on that. Joe Bakovitz is on the call this afternoon, so I'll give everyone a moment. If you have questions for Joe, if you'd like to put those in the chat box or unmute yourself, I'll give you a minute to do so.
Andrew?
Yes, Joe.
Sorry. I would just add that We are pursuing a June 20th cutoff date for 2021. We're doing it through the Indiana Pesticide Review Board, classifying these as highly volatile herbicides, but that hasn't actually happened all the way yet. So I can't say for sure we're going to end up at a June 20th cutoff date, but that is what we're pursuing at this time.
Great, thanks for that update. Any questions out there? Okay, well, hearing none, thank you, Joe, for that information and for joining the call this afternoon. You had your contact information there at the end, so if anything does come up, please feel free to reach out to Joe, I'm sure. With that, we'll move on to our next speaker. Speaking of dicamba, we're going to get a weed management update from Dr. Bill Johnson from the Purdue Weed Science Department. So I'm going to mute myself here and Bill will be sharing his screen.
Bill, that's just Bill. This is Fred. That's just Bill trying to impress people with his desktop with all those things. There's nothing in those folders. I've looked at them.
Okay, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, all right. So, so Andrew, do you want me still to go 45 minutes, or do you want me to make it more like 30?
We're flexible, I think. I started a few minutes late, but if you, depending on how Fred wants to do it, I had you down till 2:15, but maybe he can be flexible.
Okay, I'll try not to run too much past 2:15.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, yeah.
Bill, I'm putting money. You can't do it. All right.
Well,
You're on the clock, buddy.
Okay, all right. I'd hate to delay the micronutrient talk, but all right, here we go. So let's talk a little bit about weeds. I'll show you this slide here first, if I can make this technology work. There we go. So feel free to do a screen capture or take a picture or whatever you'd like to do. Basically what we have here is a number of different sources of weed science information. In terms of the weed control guide, usually we have that printed and we're distributing it this week, but because we're delayed and we're not printing nearly as many copies this year because we're not distributing it at the CCA conference or at the crop management workshops, we're a little bit delayed on that. But the weed guide should be available once we get into January. So we will have a PDF version of that in addition to the printed version. And then we've got a couple of social media sites here. So the Facebook site, I try to use that as kind of an area where I'll write some newsletter articles and then share it through that Facebook site as well. Both Marcelo and I have Twitter sites where we try to use that mostly for weed science information. And then with many of the videos that we've shot over the past year, and we still have more to add to this, we've got a YouTube site as well, and we're starting to populate that with more videos. So anyway, feel free to use any of those sites there. And then again, for the farmers in the group, if you're paying a checkoff fee, you're contributing to not only to the state checkoff, but also to the federal checkoff. And USB funds this initiative called Take Action, which we lead here at Purdue. And essentially what we try to do there is we try to get out information to growers on how to manage herbicide-resistant weeds and how to steward some of the new herbicide resistance traits that we have in soybean. Okay, so for my winter meeting season, there's a number of different topics that I'm talking about. It all kind of depends on how much time I have available in terms of how much how much information that I give on each topic. But here's kind of the main things that we cover in our winter meeting season this year. So I'll kind of go through these and talk a little bit about each one. So here's the chart that shows our the herbicide-resistant weeds that we've documented in the eastern Corn Belt in Indiana in particular. And then for each weed, we've documented what type of resistance that we've been able to identify as well. So what you see here, excuse me, clearly by far the largest, excuse me, number of weeds are resistant to the ALS inhibitor group of herbicides. And these would be herbicides like Classic, Scepter, Pursuit, Accent, Beacon, those types of herbicides. And we have, nearly 10 or so weeds that are resistant to that family of chemistry. The second one would be glyphosate. We have 5 weeds now that are resistant to glyphosate, both ragweed species, water hemp, mare's tail, and Palmer amaranth. And then this PPO inhibitor group here, we have both Palmer and water hemp that's resistant to these PPOs, and this would be the Cobra, Blazer, and Reflex type of herbicides. We're also starting to look at both some common and giant ragweed populations that are becoming more problematic to control with these herbicides as well. But if you think about the weeds that are the biggest headaches for us, it's the weeds that have resistance to more than one site of action. And so glyphosate and ALS inhibitors, and we have 4 species there, ragweed, water hemp, mare's tail, and Palmer amaranth. And then we do have a couple of weeds that are resistant to 3 sites of action, and that would be water hemp and Palmer amaranth. Now, between these two, water hemp by far infests more acres than Palmer amaranth does. And over the last 10 years or so, it's probably become our number 1 weed. When I first moved to Indiana in the early 2000s, giant ragweed and lamb's quarter were our biggest headaches. And now I'd have to say that water hemp and mare's tail, for the guys that are kind of sloppy with their burn down, are probably the 2 worst weed problems that we have. So anyway, what I do a lot of times in these winter meeting presentations is I go through a pretty detailed recipe on how to control each of these weeds. And we have fact sheets to support this. And we also have a problem weed section in the weed control guide. But I think and I'm not going to go through all those recommendations today because we're kind of limited on time. But I think a key thing to remember is that with water hemp and Palmer amaranth in particular, you need to be ready to spend $50 an acre on those. And you need a full rate of a broad spectrum residual herbicide as your backbone. And then hopefully all you're doing is cleaning up a few escapes with your post-emerge herbicide. So again, it's an expensive weed. The backbone is the residual herbicide. There's a number of products out there that you can use, but you also have to be cautious too about the rate of the active ingredient in the product. There's a number of combo products available in the marketplace, but we're going to become experts on herbicides again because we really have to get back to understanding how much active ingredient it takes to control a specific weed. And there's a lot of products in the marketplace that will offer you a reduced rate of a couple of different active ingredients, which is great for about 2 to 3 weeks. But what you're really trying to get out of that residual is 6 to 8 weeks of control. And then again, all you're trying to do with that post-emerge herbicide is clean up a few escapes. Now, the notable exception to that is giant ragweed. Giant ragweed in soybean is a booger to control with the residual herbicide. We don't have residual herbicides that are great in soybean. Corn, on the other hand, we have great residual herbicides in corn that we can use for ragweed, but we don't have those in soybeans. So in ragweed, we need to have a slightly different mindset, and we need to make sure we've got a residual herbicide that's controlling the other weeds. But what we're really going to do with ragweed is we're going to go after that with our post-emerge herbicides. And if it's resistant to glyphosate and the ALS inhibitors, there's no way you're going to control the ragweed in either the non-GMO beans or the straight Roundup Ready 2s. And so it's going to force you to grow one of the new traits. So whether that's Liberty Link, LLGT27s, Enlist, Extend, or whatever it happens to be, you're going to be pretty reliant on that post-emerge herbicide. So again, I'm not going to go through the detailed control recommendations for each of those. There's a lot of information available out there on how to do that. But again, just keep in mind that, you know, with 3 of those 4 weeds, you're really kind of building your program around that residual herbicide. Okay, let's talk a little bit about herbicide drift. And I was listening closely to Joe's talk prior to mine, so hopefully there's not a lot of overlap here. So I looked at it, and I do have a few kind of a different twist on some things here that I'm going to talk about. So, you know, early in the growing season, if we look back over the last 7 or 8 years, there's typically anywhere from, you know, 10 to about 30 early season drift complaints that come in, and it's kind of the usual suspects. It's things like 2,4-D, dicamba, glyphosate, sharpen. And so, you know, this year was pretty similar to that. Joe talked about the hard freeze that we had in early May, and a lot of that was confused for herbicide injury, and I agree with that wholeheartedly. If we break it down to just the herbicide cases, the early season drift, again, wasn't a lot different than what we've seen in past years. And if we have, you know, let's say 20 or 30 cases early in the year, that's less than 1 per county. I mean, that's probably business as usual from the standpoint of these early season drift cases. Now, you know, where things have gotten different for us, for the state chemist's office, and for you as growers, has been that post-emerge season. So this is a slide that I'm using this winter, and it's basically a summary of the drift complaints over a fairly long period of time. So I've kind of got this broken up into 2 areas. If we think about the era before dicamba beans, so from 2012 to 2016, if we take a look at the drift case data from the Office of the State Chemist, roughly 100 total per year, and about 5 of those were dicamba drift suspects. If we look at 17, 18, and 19, we more than double the total number of cases, and we go up by a factor of at least 20 on the dicamba suspects. So again, this post-emerge dicamba in soybeans, and the fact that non-resistant soybeans are so sensitive to dicamba, that's just led to a huge uptick in the number of drift complaints, and particularly those related to dicamba. Joe gave you some rather specific numbers for 2020, and I just kind of averaged those out here. So we were down, you know, from the 230s to the 270s down around 220, and I think Joe showed about 180 or so. I think as we got later in the fall, that number might have been up. That might have been where I got that 200 number from the Pesticide Review Board meeting, with roughly 80 of those being dicamba. So again, good news is the total numbers went down, but I'm not sure I could pin the reason for that on one thing in particular. I do think the earlier cutoff date played a role in reducing those numbers. I also think that that dicamba fatigue played a role as well, and there's some folks that are getting drifted on every year and nothing happens, and so, you know, they're just kind of tired of turning it in. I think you know, that's part of it. I do think we have certain townships where we have more of the landscape that have dicamba resistant beans that are being grown as well. And so they're somewhat protected from it by growing the trait. But I spend a lot of time driving around through all of the state, and my perception in driving through the state is our complaint numbers might be down, but in terms of the number of damaged fields, I don't think that's changed a lot. So again, the caseload to the Office of the Indiana State Chemist was definitely lower. COVID probably played a role in that as well. But nonetheless, we still, this is still an awful lot of off-target movement of dicamba. And regulatory agencies, scientists, and farmers all alike have recognized that it is still a problem. So Joe talked about the decision by the circuit court. He also talked about the cutoff date as well. So what I want to do is spend a little bit of time talking about some of the label issues that are going to impact you guys pretty directly. And so just to make sure you've heard it here, but it's also your responsibility to go through the dicamba training and basically document that you've looked at that as well. So again, if we take a look at the new labels, which have been approved now for 21 through 25, here are some of this rather specific things that are a change. So number one, the buffers got bigger. So now you have to have a downwind buffer of 240 feet, 310 feet if you're in a county where an endangered species is located. If you're willing to use a hooded sprayer, you can reduce the size of your downwind buffer. And then the federal label also has a cutoff date of June 30th. And as Joe mentioned, the Office of the Indiana State Chemist is going to pursue a June 20th cutoff date, just like they did last year. Another thing that's kind of a big change for this year is that you must add a pH buffering agent. And the whole idea with this is that after numerous university trials showed that by lowering the pH of the spray solution, you got more volatility of dicamba. The manufacturers finally admitted that it was a problem, and they now you have to have a buffering agent in the tank mix. And again, there's going to be a website that you can go to and figure out which ones you can add to that mixture. And the whole idea here is to lower volatility, and this will be part of the record keeping process as well, that you must document the use of this. Okay, so again, if you got more questions, these are some of the big things, I guess, on that label. The state chemist's office also has a website as well where they're posting a lot of the dicamba specific information. The web address is located at the top of the screen here. If we go on to the next page here, and Joe went over this as well, the US EPA accepted the new labels for the use of some of the dicamba products and soybeans. And then again, we went over some of the restrictions as well. Again, there's a lot of questions about dicamba. EPA, doesn't always do the greatest job of helping us understand their decisions. And so one of the things they've done is they have a dicamba frequently asked question website as well. And so you can go to this website here. Basically, you just type in EPA's, dicamba decision, and it'll bring up this website. And then you can click on these various links here and try to get some idea into the insight that they use to make some of these decisions. Okay, so I'm not going to say a lot more about the dicamba label. My perception that in the marketplace that Enlist soybeans are flying off the shelf about as fast as they can fill the bags. And so I do think that technology is going to make a pretty dramatic input into the marketplace this year. So just like we talked about last year, this is a technology that has some application restrictions. So it's not unlike we've experienced with the dicamba system. Buffers are 30 feet to a sensitive area. And again, this is also a do not spray if wind is blowing towards a susceptible crop. The cutoff is a soybean growth stage rather than a calendar date. You do have a website that has the approved tank mix partners and nozzles. You can mix AMS with Liberty, whereas with the dicamba technology, if you're growing Extend Flex beans that are also Liberty linked, At this point, we're supposed to meet with Bayer on Friday, but at this point, you're not supposed to mix AMS with dicamba for that treatment. And we all know that Liberty requires AMS to make it work properly. Here's the wind restrictions, 3 to 15 mile an hour on the Enlist soybeans. Sprayer carrier volume is 10 to 15 GPA, and your boom height must be 24 inches or less. So again, those are some of the pertinent things in regard to the E3 or the 2,4-D Liberty tolerant soybeans. You know, one of the things that we see happening is as you have areas out there where you have both Extend beans and dicamba beans being grown in close proximity, is they're going to be moving off site to one another. So about a year and a half ago, we created a bunch of demo plots in the greenhouse and in the field, took quite a few pictures, and then we developed this publication that kind of helps you differentiate 2,4-D and dicamba injury. Because again, it's going to happen. You're going to have 2,4-D drift onto dicamba beans, and you're going to have dicamba drift onto 2,4-D beans. So with a little bit of training, you can tell them apart. There's a couple key things to keep in mind. Typically with 2,4-D damage, you get what we call leaf strapping, which means it looks like you've grabbed the leaf and attempted to stretch it. The stems will twist, and then you'll get this, what we call callus formation, which is basically like warts that grow on the stem. With dicamba, you don't get all of that stuff. You really get more leaf cupping. Soybeans are a lot more sensitive to dicamba than they are to 2,4-D. Typically, we can see injury and yield loss at less than 0.2% of the field rate. With 2,4-D, yield loss usually occurs at around 5% of the field use rate. So again, soybeans are a lot more sensitive to dicamba than they are to 2,4-D. So just to take a look at some of the pictures, this is a 2,4-D injury on dicamba soybeans. So here's an example of some of the callus formation. You see this thickening of the stem. You see these kind of wart type structures. This would be the leaf strapping, where it looks like you've grabbed the leaf and attempted to stretch it. The veins are they're trying to grow parallel to the mid vein. And then you can see some of this stem twisting here in the bottom photograph. Dicamba, on the other hand, you typically don't get the callus formation. You get the cupping of the leaves. You don't see the thickening of the stems like you do with 2,4-D. If the rates are high enough, you can get death of the meristems here. And then again, here's a picture here that kind of shows more of the full screen or the full field effect of leaf cupping. Now, one of the things that we occasionally see in the field is for some of these fields that kind of get whacked, they either get whacked pretty hard or they get whacked more than once, is you see the symptomology that can be kind of confusing. So the field on the left-hand side received a 10x higher rate than the field on the right-hand side. But what you can see here is the symptomology looks less severe on this side. Well, the reason it looks less severe on the left side is that rate was high enough that those beans stopped growing. They stopped growing and they stopped putting on new trifoliates. Whereas on the right-hand side, the beans continue to grow. They continue to put on new trifoliates. And so the injury appears to be more severe. So that's why it can be very difficult to make an in-season assessment of what kind of yield loss you're going to suffer with that with that exposure rate. Okay, now along that same line of thinking, the XtendFlex soybeans were approved this fall. And XtendFlex soybeans allow the spraying of dicamba, glyphosate, and Liberty post-emergence, Liberty or glufosinate. So this is somewhat analogous to what you can do in the Enlist soybean, the Enlist E3 beans, where you can spray glyphosate, glufosinate, and 2,4-D. That's the E3 technology. In the XtendFlex technology, you can apply dicamba, glyphosate, and glufosinate. So here's a table here that shows the various soybean technologies on the left-hand side, the herbicide resistance traits, and then the herbicides that are enabled, and then just kind of a short description here of what we consider to be the benefit, the risk, and then some general comments. So non-GMO obviously is the most restrictive in terms of what herbicides can be applied. Your Roundup Ready 2s now are almost becoming like non-GMOs. Essentially, it enables the use of glyphosate, but we have so many glyphosate-resistant weeds now that trait I think is probably going to be somewhat short-lived. Liberty Link and the Roundup Ready to Extend. So Liberty Link would allow the spraying of glufosinate, which is Liberty. Roundup Ready Extend is the Roundup and the dicamba trait. And then these LLGT27s allow you to spray Liberty, Balance, pre-emerge, and then Roundup post-emergence. And then the bottom two here are the E3s and the Extend Flexes that we just talked about. So again, kind of a good thing to keep in mind. And I think as you think about your most problematic weeds, you do have some options here now to kind of go out and shop for the soybean varieties that have the best disease package, that have high yield potential, but you can enable different herbicides, especially if you're doing spraying yourself, you can kind of enable the herbicides that you want to use in your operation. All right, so in terms of some of our weed control challenges for 2020. So 2020 is a year that I kind of classify as we had a dry fall in 19, so we saw a little bit of herbicide carryover. Then we had a relatively hot and dry June, a hot and dry August and September. And so that almost sets us up for some more carryover situations next year. But the hot and dry June also led to some difficulty in post-emerge weed control as well this year, because we had a lot of weeds that got sprayed when they were drought stressed. So in terms of the herbicide carryover that we saw this year, by far the most that we saw was the HPPDs. So this would be herbicides like Balance, Callisto, mostly those two. And essentially what happens is the beans come out of the ground, they look kind of yellow and sickly, but they usually grow out of it. So that was easily the most common one that we saw this year. We saw a little bit of FlexStar carry over to corn and just a little smattering of atrazine and ALS carryover. So going into 2021, because we were dry in June, August, and September, it would not surprise me to see more of this as well. So just something to kind of keep in mind. If you had late applications of HPPDs or FlexStars, remember these things have some fairly long rotational intervals, and so you might be in a situation where this happens in 2021. So, as I mentioned earlier, herbicide carryover is influenced by soil properties, rainfall, and the herbicide application timing. I do think we're set up to do that next year. And let's see here. This is kind of a listing of the ones that we've seen over the last 20 years or so that I've been working here in Indiana. So if we think about the rotational intervals, atrazine is 10 months from corn to soybean. If applied after June 10th, you're really supposed to rotate to corn or sorghum the next season. Callisto is a 10-month rotational restriction, so that's why we saw the injury on the beans. FlexStar is 10 months as well. So again, with a lot of the FlexStar that goes out late in the year for giant ragweed, water hemp, or whatever, morning glories, this one here has the potential to be a problem pretty frequently because we tend to spray this one later than most of the other herbicides on this list. So again, if you're interested in more information on this, we've got a newsletter article that we wrote in 18 that's still current, and then Pioneer also has a nice article on this as well. Okay, next topic I want to talk about then. All right, so as I mentioned, we saw some challenges with post-emerge weed control in 2020, and a lot of it had to do with with post-emerge dicamba applications in soybeans, and water hemp and mare's tail in particular were a couple of weeds that we struggled to control. So we're doing some screening now with water hemp and dicamba and some other active ingredients as well. But again, we need to remember that dicamba is kind of marginal on water hemp anyway. In a lot of cases, we have folks that they're shaving rates. They don't have the right droplet size coming out of their sprayer. The weeds are big. And then we do have some populations in areas where corn is grown, where dicamba has been used in corn for a number of years. And so the scenario is it's set up for this to happen. So the question will be how quickly it happens and how fast does it spread. So I show you an example here of what some of these plants look like. And what you can see with these plants here is, number one, look at the size of the stem here. Both of these plants were pretty big when they were sprayed. It did a pretty good job of setting it back, but you can see new growth here that's coming up from these axillary buds. Here's one a little bit later in the season. Again, you can tell we killed the terminal, but new branches came out, and this guy is going to go and produce quite a bit of seed. So here's a picture of some of the populations. These are actually 4 different populations that we screened in the greenhouse. So the 1X rate is shown in this middle photograph. So each of these rows would be 8 different plants of an individual population. So if we take a look at the half X rate here, this first population, we basically killed 6 out of the 8 plants. With this population, we only killed 2 out of the 8. This one, 2 out of the 8. And this one, really, you only have 1 dead one in there. Now, when we go up to the 1X rate, this population, for the most part, is toast. This second population here, we've got 1 live plant. And this population here, we've got 3 live plants. But in a field situation, 1 out of 8 plants means you're getting about 88% control. And with water hemp, that's not high enough. So with water hemp, we want 95% or better. And so this is really, both of these populations here are respray scenarios. And I think what this clearly shows you here is that, if you think about weeds growing in close proximity to one another, weeds that might have a leaf or 2 underneath the soybean canopy, it's pretty rare to expose an entire plant to a 1X rate of the herbicide. So, the rate's going to be reduced because there's going to be mutual shading and things like that going on. So what this shows you here is that we just don't have a lot of margin for error to be getting reduced rates on water hemp, because we will have survivors, and that will result in a resistant situation. Okay, so I think I've got about one more thing I'm going to talk about, and then I'm going to finish up here. So as we go to growing more dicamba-resistant soybeans or 2,4-D resistant soybeans, and given the fact that we're almost always treating for volunteer corn now with something like Select Max, we're starting to see where these growth regulator type of herbicides are antagonized by 2,4-D dicamba, and sometimes they're antagonized by the warrant that you put in there to give residual control on water hemp. So I wanted to show you a few data slides here, but basically this kind of goes back to the 1980s, where if you're trying to avoid antagonism of this grass herbicide, of the Select Max, what you do is you have to either apply it separately or you increase the rate. So what this shows you here, this is volunteer corn control with 2 clethodim products. And you can see here that when we've got the 3-way tank mix, our volunteer corn control is pretty poor. If we increase the clethodim rate, we can bring that up to about 70%, but that's still pretty marginal. So again, this is going to be volunteer corn here. So if we take a look at Assure, the Assure product even has more antagonism problems than clethodim does. So here's putting dicamba and glyphosate with Assure. This is dicamba, glyphosate, and acetochlor with it. And again, by going with the high rate, we can overcome some of that, but we don't overcome all of it. So anyway, that's just kind of something to keep in mind if you're struggling to control volunteer corn, that this can be something that's causing it as well. It could be the dicamba or the 2,4-D that's in the tank with it. Okay, I think it's 2:15, Andrew. So I think I'm going to stop right there and take any questions before we turn this over to Fred.
Okay, thank you, Bill. I'll give everyone a moment to gather their questions while Bill's on the line. Just type into chat box, or if you'd like to hop on the call.
How'd I do, Fred? Did I stay on time?
You got me. So I owe you a beer. A generic beer, but a beer at last, nevertheless. Very good.
As long as there's no antagonism, I'm good.
All right. Andrew, you may start? Or you got some questions for Dr. Johnson?
I don't see anything in the chat. I'll give everybody one more.
Bob Yoder had a question. Resistance to dicamba, is it happening? So the short answer is, if you go out into wheat country, western part of the Corn Belt, they do have dicamba resistance that's already happened in some of the broadleaf weeds that are in wheat production, because wheat is a monocrop and grown continuously. So the answer to your question, Bob, is yes. We haven't officially documented it yet, but it's just like the early days of glyphosate resistance. We see these populations that are segregating and that have escaped plants in them. So it's just a matter of time. Okay, well, thank you.
All right, thank you, Bill. Appreciate you joining us this afternoon. Our last speaker this afternoon, I know he doesn't like to be introduced too well, so I'm just going to turn things over to Fred.
All right, Andrew, I'm going to go ahead and share now. Is that true?
Yes.
Okay. All right, and you can see it and you can hear me. Is that right? Okay, he's already left, so he must don't need the credits. Okay, I see Adams County give me not the finger, the thumb. Okay, Adams County, thank you very much. So what we're going to do is, I think we're on sort of the forefront here of people applying micronutrients. I'm not an agronomist, and I'm not here to say whether they work, they don't work, how much yield and all that. You guys are working, gals are working that out now. What I am being asked are questions about having how to store these materials. I would ask the educators, if you would, grab your piece of paper and then ask your group. If you're online, you can answer these the same way. I'm trying to get a sense of what's happening in the state. Roughly, I believe about 10 or 15% of the people are using micronutrients. And if you'll just poll your folks and just ask them if they would, whether they apply it or somebody's applying it for them. And that would be boron, zinc, magnesium. I'm even including things like sulfur, though it's not a micronutrient. It's one of those additional things. I would like to know if you will ask them how is anybody storing micronutrients? Is it a 2.5 gallon jug, a mini bulk, or do you actually have a tank that's dedicated to it? I won't ask you this because the answers that I'm getting so far is across the boards. They're from one end to the other, mixed in fertilizers, mixed in planting, mixed it. I mean, he goes the whole gamut. What I'm really interested here is there anybody in the group doing foliar sampling and feeding? So I think there we're probably down to a small percentage, but I think it's growing. So the bottom line here, it's right now a $1 billion industry. And the expectations is we're going to be using more and more of these materials if the yields are justified by the yields are paying for the cost plus bringing us more. Obviously something's going on because our ag retailers are putting more and more of these tanks in storage. So what we're going to do is look at some tanks, but again, you can buy this stuff in these smaller containers, and you can see here we got sulfur, boron, manganese, and zinc, and those particular products you'll see right there are very small percentage of the material, and we're seeing people storing that, using that in 2.5 gallon tanks. We're also seeing some of these same products at the same low levels, at these mixed levels in mini bulks. And then we have actually more concentrated product. So here you're looking at zinc at about 10%. So we have the blended products, and then we have what I'm going to call here the pure products that we have. Now, my goal is to try to, if you're deciding at some point to bring micronutrients onto your farm and put them on storage, we're going to cover that. And then what I'm going to do, though, is look through the different tanks that are available that we commonly use. And even if you are not storing micronutrients, I'm hoping that this part here is going to be helpful to you relative to your tanks or purchasing tanks for other uses. We have a series of publications. If you're interested in that, talk to your extension educator. Look up Fred Whitford online. We have a website. They can help you. We'll get you the publication if you're interested. So as you know, we have basically two kinds of tanks. We got the flat bottom tanks and we got the long tanks. These long tanks are for transportation on trucks. These flat bottom tanks are meant to go on the ground. Now, having said that, I also noticed that I see more round tanks on trailers than I do these long tanks. And part of that reason is I can put more of those round tanks on it, on my trailer. But these tanks here are designed because of the sloshing. If you look inside of them, you can see these little divots inside of it. And that's where you've got plastic that's in there that's going to try to stop that flow back and forth from front to back. And the manufacturers will actually thicken these up in here to try to protect that tank as it's going back and forth. These are your storage tanks, the flat bottom tanks. And in these particular tanks, I always say about knee high. If you kind of look at them, they look like a plastic milk jug in essence. What they do is when you fill them up, they expand, and when when you empty them out, they contract. And by the way, if any of the educators out there have any questions as we go, I'll take them. It's easier to take them now. I can't see people, so I can't call them out by name. So you'll have to work them for me if they have questions. Now, years ago when we started the poly tank, I can remember in one talk, a guy left as I was doing this talk, and he came back and I said, "What was wrong, Jim?" And he says, "I ordered the wrong tanks. I was going to put fertilizer in them, and I ordered the wrong poly tanks." And I'll never forget that. That was a pretty important moment for me. These tanks come in 3 different densities: a 1.0, a 1.5, and a 1.9. A 1.0 tank holds the weight of water. That's what it's designed to do. A 1.5 tank holds 1.5 times the weight of water, or about 12 pounds. And then we have 1.9 tanks, but I haven't seen very many of those. Those are going to hold about twice the weight of water, something very heavy, 17. So if you looked at this, and I'm gonna go ahead just a little bit, and you can see on this particular Snyder tank, You can see it right here. There it is. It's a 1.5, which means for me, it's a fertilizer tank. It holds 1.5 times the weight of water. So look at your micronutrients are going to be right in there with your fertilizers in terms of weight. I'm looking for one tank that's going to hold everything that I can. Okay, you're going to see that this approach, so I don't have to buy multiple tanks. So when you buy a tank, you're going to need to get one that's 1.5 density. And if you're going to put them in another poly tank, I would like to see you make sure that what you're putting them in is in fact a 1.5, so you don't have any spills and lose material. Now, I'm going to add, and I'll ask Adams County first. Can you ask your folks there, ask somebody there, what's the #1 enemy of tanks? Let's see if somebody would respond so I don't have to talk to myself on the stupid computer. What's the answer?
Hey, we got sunlight.
That's good. That's right. Thank you very much. So thanks, Brad. So sunlight is your #1 enemy. And again, I'm talking about micronutrients in a few minutes, but these tanks, and so this is a tank that it was a 1.0 holding fertilizer, which already stressed the tank. And time we add to it, staying outside, you're going to see what happens, okay? Now, I got called out to this farm, and this started all of my tank stuff.
Our guess is that it started right here. And in fact, it makes sense because if you think about it, you can see how high off the tank.
And you can see how it breaks on a poly.
It broke here in the middle, broke right here, and this whole piece just split. Look at the jagged edges on it. You can see that it broke in a number of different pieces. It had such power that what it did when it started to split, you can see here where the valve is. It was actually where I'm standing.
Okay, so this tank was 2,500 gallons, just went out, and it actually blew out. All right, let's see if I can make this work.
So somebody's going to ask us which bat we use.
So if any of you have ever put out a 5-gallon bucket outside or a milk jug or anything plastic, and you left it out all year, and in the fall you went to get it, you could kick it and it would break. And that's what happens. But a good milk jug is able to go bend and filled and be emptied. But once they get hard and brittle, then I lose that ability to sort of bounce, okay? So what I'm going to show you here is what sunlight does.
It's made in Louisville, so it's the real bat. You're looking at the back? Tell me when you're ready.
So you can see how hard that wall is and what happens whenever sunlight breaks it down. And if you remember in the old days, we had the same problems with all the cars that we had. The dash would break down, would actually start cracking, our seats were cracking, everything was cracking. I'll never forget this one because this tank here was bad, that tank there was on its way out. And I asked the farmer, I said, let's hit that tank. He said, boy, you done broke one tank, you're not gonna break another one. And I told him I didn't break that tank, it was already broke. But I'm gonna show you how to test these tanks. And this is pretty important. When sunlight hits it, it begins to break down, no matter what the density is. And what you can't see are these fine cracks. So what we're gonna do is use a non-permanent marker, and we're going to wipe it. We're going to show you that. And that ink's going to go into the poly. You're going to wipe it off, and you're going to see, do you see these checkerboard, dry rot, whatever you want to call these kinds of things?
The manufacturers have got a couple recommendations to take a look at where we can do some inspections on these tanks. Besides just a visual inspection of the overall tank, we can use a couple other methods. One of those is by using a water-soluble pen. And basically what this is doing is giving us kind of an early detection of deterioration of this material. Now, the deterioration that we're looking for is basically the UV or ultraviolet light from the sun, and for the most part, we're going to kind of start looking at the upper part of the tank because this is the most exposure to the sunlight from above.
So you're just going to mark it. If there's any cracks in it, and you wipe it off because it's not permanent.
And it accentuates the crazing and the deterioration of the tank.
And hopefully it shows in the building where you're at. When you do this outside, it just pops up. It just is, I mean, it's easy to see. This one here, you didn't even need a pen. This was a tank that's showing that breakdown of the material. And you can see, again, dry rot, checkerboard, alligator skin, those kind of things. If you have a tank on your farm right now, you do the pen test. And if it's a storage tank, I'm going to check it from about knee high, and I'm going to check it wherever you're putting your hose into it, the bung, to look around that, because it basically bends back and forth. If it's a transport tank, I'm going to check the end. And I'm serious here. What I want you to do is take a bat or a hammer or anything when you see that checkerboard, and I want you to hit it.
So, Mike, you be the man of the day. Hit us a home run here.
Now, again, you can see where he cracked it. This tank was on its last legs. And remember, as a grower, none of you have got insurance to cover spills. And that's the reason why we ask you to do this preventively. A, not to lose money, but not have to spend a lot of money cleaning up a mess. So it's a simple pen test. Before you put any more products, if you've got products, tanks that are empty on the poly, sunlight is the Achilles heel of a poly tank. And again, I'm asking you to check with your pen around in here, because as you move that hose back and forth, that's just plastic. And again, you can see the crack. This was one that it blew out right in here and covered up the farmer's front. Now, don't get fooled in the colors. You've seen all kind of colors in these poly tank. Color has nothing to do with breakdown. They all have the UV protection. It's more for marketing. So you may have a tank manufacturer that markets their, I'm going to make it up, blue is a 1.9, yellow is a 1.5, and white is a 1.0. You may have a company that does it differently. Now, you can get black tanks, and people have used them to control algae. But for me, I would rather have the algae and clean it up. I want to see what's in the tank, where we're at in it. But again, black can help us in that manner. When you order large poly tanks, make sure it's not just the cost of the poly tank. It's going to be the cost to ship these things, CDL drivers, oversized loads, and you're going to see at times we're going to need later on crane operators. So poly tank, good tank, and we'll come back to it. Achilles heel is sunlight. Fiberglass tanks. You can see here they're making a fiberglass tank, and you look on the bottom. If maybe you can see two sets of materials being applied. It's resin, similar to poly but different, and fiberglass, and you can see what they're doing here to also wrap it. This is how they make their tops as well, or the bottoms, and you can see what's kind of neat here is this gun that is shooting fiberglass and resin at the same time. This is the brown coming off of it. This is, again, these are all pre-made on order. And this is what some of them that would look on farms. This is one that was been in for quite a while. I know the grower, and he decided to invest a little bit more in the fiberglass because they are more expensive. And a couple of good things about fiberglass is I can put heavier plumbing on it. I've got a structure to tie on into it. And so I like these, and they can be repaired where you can't fix poly tanks. This, by the way, is unpainted. If you're going to put it outside, you're going to have to pay a little extra for paint to try to block that UV again. And again, the beauty of it is you can repaint them and you can repair it And if there's a leak, it seeps. It doesn't bust like an egg. I'm going to keep bringing this up because I get more calls about people being irritated about what it costs beyond the tank. Always add in the transportation cost and unloading your fiberglass tanks on site. This is KVK, one of the companies that makes them and they deliver them. Again, you got the oversized load. You're going to have the driver and that additional cost. Carbon steel is another one. You call them mild steel tanks. Good tanks for 28, but most of you know that the Achilles heel of these particular products is going to be corrosion. When you buy a tank, at least to me, unless there's a welder in the group that tells me that ain't so, on the outside, they can make them look really, really nice. But what I'm interested is on the inside, are all of these things welded and sealed, because that stuff is going, in our case, 28% is a corrosive material, right? And so the concern here is this stuff leaking in. And this is the corrosion that we're talking about, and all of you are familiar with that. So both of them actually, and he's telling me now that these fertilizers that he's getting are so much more acidic, and the more acidic, we're seeing more corrosion on these tanks. And again, these micronutrients you're going to see are pretty caustic. A farmer sent me this one here, I guess, to prove his point that somebody does listen to us, an extension at times. And you can see here that this tank is shot, and you know that's doing it preventatively.
We're doing good. Again, I really appreciate you letting us.
So this is Mike Titus. Let me see if I can make my.
Tell me what you do for Cole.
To save a little time, will this work? And it won't. So what I was going to do is to take you inside of the tank, but it is not working for whatever reason. So as you suspect, once I got inside of a tank, let me go back here. Once I go back inside of the tank, you are going to see piles of stuff. All this corroded material off that one tank that we went into. I mean, it's feet deep. It's all the materials left over from 28, and it's just I can't empty those tanks out very well. But again, they served a purpose. The Achilles heel to this one is the corrosion, and in these cases, we're going to need to have a crane to be able to put these in. And then the last one we'll quickly cover is stainless steel. These are also made pre-ordered. And here is one of the interesting things that I learned was there are two kinds of stainless out there, and I was not aware of that. And mostly what you and I purchased to go on the farm for stainless is 304. And you're seeing it right there. It's on this one right there. 304 is going to have a difficult time with these corrosive materials. I'll show you some examples of that. So most of our stainless that we have is 304. And if that's what you have and you decide you want to put micronutrients, it would be like putting it into a mild steel tank. What we're interested is in this 316 stainless. It has less carbon and doesn't corrode with these micronutrients and other products. So if you're going to go to a stainless, invest in the 316, because then you're going to have a product that's going to last longer. And again, the same idea. You got larger tanks, I'm going to have people haul them in. Okay, so poly fiber with the right liner to protect it. We have carbon steel, and we have the stainless. So now let's begin to ask the question, are there better tanks to use versus others? And based on that little bit of background I gave you, some of these micronutrients are very acidic. Some you can see almost to the point of battery acid, or on the other end like bleach, very caustic. So because of that, I am going to eliminate the mild steel tanks and any tanks that are stainless 304. okay, and the fittings. And what I'm talking about here are for the pure products, the ones that are a high percentage of tin. The ones that are blended may work, and they could, but you're going to need to ask the manufacturer. But for me right now, I want one tank that can do everything. So I'm going to get rid of these tanks from my options. If it can hold sulfuric acid, a poly tank can hold these micronutrients, okay? And that's the advantage of a poly tank, extremely versatile in what it can store. So that's going to lead me to that one. I can use a fiberglass. Most of what you have a lining on the inside that's good for your 28%. But if you put a micronutrient in it, it's going to be a lot more caustic or acidic. And we're looking at then adding a vinyl liner on the inside to help us protect that tank. So again, if you've already got a fiberglass tank, understand, unless you ask the manufacturer about the liner, it's probably not going to work. And if you're going to have one, let's say at ag retail, and you decide to do that, then you're going to have one that has.
Here we have a stainless steel tank 316.
Good tank.
And again, a good tank for most of these products, you're going to want to ask the manufacturer whatever the micronutrients that you're using. The key thing here is just like the poly tank, is to be able to get a slope tank. And if this one here, you can see the pipe on the bottom, it's got a slight slope, which allows me to empty the tank. Now, what we're seeing over and over again now, and we're going to see it here as well, if we come around on this side over here, there's a key point here on any of these tanks, and that's compatibility, not only of the tank, but any of the fittings that we're using. So in this example, you're seeing there where we're going to load the trucks to load up this tank. And so the material comes through here, and there's always material still staying here. So the critical part here that we're seeing over and over is when we use a 304 stainless steel to go into into the higher grade steel. So the 304 for some of these products are corrosive. We have had problems right in here with the materials eating out, gaskets eating the metal, and so on. Now, it's also on this system here, I have a pump right here that stays basically from here on, it is staying full of liquid. And that thing is being bathed in corrosive material now, which causes problems with some of our gasket seals and other things. So we're going to have to ask, if you're going to have something that has the micronutrients in it, is the seals and the rest of the materials there, can it withstand being basically soaked in this?
Okay. So again, we're just going to show you some examples. That's what a 304, any of the pipe, the fittings, and all those kind of things. We're going to try to stay away from that when you're using micronutrients and have everything to be 316. This is a 316 tank that they adapted. I can't remember what reason, and you can see the corrosion taking place. That corrosion is the same thing with the mild steel, you call it cast iron, whatever. You can see here what's happening. So if you've got pumps that are cast iron, which most of you do, your standard pump, you should expect that those pumps are not going to last as long if they're specifically devoted to a micronutrients, okay? It's just corrosive. Here's another picture showing the same thing on corrosion. Now, again, always going back, if you've already got tanks that you think you can use, what you want to make sure is that the poly is a 1.5. You want to make sure that the fiber has got the right liner in it. You want to make sure that stainless is 316. So in this example here, they could not find the information on the tag. And you can see right here is a serial number. And so the only way to really know that is to call the manufacturer, give them the serial number so they can tell you. In this case, you can see they wrote 316 on it. Going back again, it's to the 304 cast iron, and this is not poly breaking down. These are the gaskets and those things that are breaking it down. And in here you can see the same thing. So, you know, as you're building your micronutrient storage, you've got to give some little bit more consideration to what these seals are made of. Again, EPDM, I've given you some information there with the high pH stuff, where Viton has the low pH. So, you know, you're going to have to give a little bit of thought to prevent problems. I got asked this the other day, and again, if there's any questions, again, I'm just talking to my screen here, but if there's any questions, this is one that came up that we actually put into the publication that's in draft. And will it damage my pumps and fittings on my trailer that has the 316 stainless? And my answer to him was no, because most of the pumps we have on the trailers, we're going to use for other things, so that you're going to be flushing out, or some of the herbicides Bill was talking about, still mainly water, you're going to be flushing those things out. And so no, as long as you're flushing them out. And then lastly, when you're done with your micronutrients, give it a good flush, and that's going to help to prevent, again, any corrosion. And thus far, unless there's somebody in the audience can tell me differently, personally, I haven't seen any damage to hoses. Our hoses don't seem to have, so far, any issues with the micronutrients. Again, I defer to you, all the eyes out there looking, if you have other difference of opinion. So I'm now down to poly, fiber, and 316. And so now I'm going to reduce it a little bit more. What I want is a cone-shaped bottom, because a lot of these tanks, a lot of these materials float, and if I don't have it, I can't flush out the system. This is, again, nobody's probably going to have it on the ag, but it shows you here the cone shape. Or on this fiberglass, you can see where it's draining to a center point, and that's good because, again, I can flush this out. Or we also have manholes if that would be necessary. But I love this sort of design on the fiberglass. And a 316 stainless, again, everything being collected on the bottom. So because of that, then, that's going to eliminate my flat bottom tanks because I want to be able to flush them out, basically. All right. Can you keep your micronutrients from freezing? If you notice right here, this one here says store above 40. And what I don't know is when they do freeze like this, when I thaw them out, are they still effective? I haven't gotten that far yet. And so that's the one question I have to get some answers to. So what this group did was, you can see the cone bottom poly. They're not that large of tanks. And I'm bringing them on the inside and the cone, and I can keep them warm. In this particular case, I'm bringing the shuttles from outside in to keep them warm. And again, I'm counting sulfur as one of the micronutrients, but though I know it's not, I'm treating it just like the others. And if you want to spend money, then you can actually put these covers on fiberglass tanks to keep them warm, to keep them from freezing. All right, so I'm down to my tanks. I know what kind I need. I know the shape. And so pretty much, I used 11,000 as the largest tank that you can buy that's poly. That may or may not be true as far as I can tell. 11,000, we're getting close to the limit. If it's under 11,000, I'm going to go with poly. It's very versatile, very good, and also cost effective. If I'm an ag retailer and I'm going above 11,000, I don't have any choice except to go to fiberglass and stainless steel 316. To the growers out there, understand you've never heard such foul language when you buy a tank, and it's yours. Once you order these fiberglass and these steel tanks and you're going to put them inside and you can't make them fit, man, dude, I've heard, Stephen, are you still listening? Nightingale? You're actually taking notes. That's impressive. Or you're writing a letter. Yeah, that's it, a blank sheet of paper. Pretty good there, Stephen. So you got to give yourself some room. And you can see this one here. It's your tank. And so we don't have much room. So just to remember, there is a formula. And if you can't work it, I got my grandson who's in the first grade could do it now. I couldn't do it till I was a senior in school. Could barely do it then. So this tank, the dimensions is 22 3/8. I said 23 to round it up. The going across, where was that at? Oh, it's 12. So A square is the 23. B square is the 12 is equal to C square. When you do the math, you need 26 feet of clearance to bring this particular thing inside, if you were doing that, to bring it inside. It's not inches, it's feet. So when you order a tank, just make sure that if you're going to go inside, that you have accounted for the tipping of that tank and being able to move it where you want it. If you need the tank right now, you're going to be using poly. If you're planning ahead, it's going to take quite a number of months, 4 to 6 months, to be able to get a fiberglass or stainless steel tank. This is a big one. You need a crane operator for some of these larger tanks. Now, when they bring your tanks, these larger tanks in, if they don't have to do much, they can lay them down and get them put up, right? That's what these folks here are doing. But if it's larger tanks, and you need to put them in a dike, it's going to take a crane. And I don't know about you folks, but this is a 40-foot tall tank, held 46,000 plus gallons. They set it up, and a couple of weeks ago, 3 weeks now, those high winds came through. And when those high winds came through, it knocked it over, and you can see the end result of the tank. And that was $34,000 that went to the scrapyard. So if you're going to bring these tanks in, you need the crane. And what I don't know yet is, can I lay these tanks down if I don't have the crane? And I need to work on that as well. Again, relatively some new, just happened. All right, and then the last one has to do with micronutrients. They are a fertilizer in the state of Indiana. In the state of Indiana, the state chemist on the fertilizer section is being more aggressive in their enforcement of the bulk containment. It's been around for whatever, 20 years. 7,500 gallons is your Indiana bulk storage rules. And that's why we have 3 2,500 gallons on lots of farms, which is not a whole lot of material. And if you do that, you stay out of the fertilizer containment. With the exception, if one of those tanks is larger than 2,500, that automatically throws you in. But most of you are doing many of you, the 3 2,500 gallons. So just be mindful that if you add those micronutrients, it might throw you into the bulk storage regulations. When they're stored, I think it's above, and I'll have to ask Joe when we get done here, I think it's anything above 55-gallon tank of this stuff would add to my total. That I'm going to need to check. So the end result of this, when I looked at all of my conditions, I think a poly tank is an extremely good tank. It's relatively cheap, cost less. It's very compatible with all of our micronutrients. I would like a cone bottom, and I'm sort of limited if I'm looking to a larger tank of somewhere in that size. But to most of the growers in here, as you move into that, I doubt you're going to be looking into it. Fiberglass is very good. You're going to need to get the vinyl liner to protect it. We're going to look for a slope floor to be able to drain it. Mild steel, I'm going to throw off the table, say it's questionable, at least for the pure products. Stainless steel is 304 is also questionable. Stainless 316, I'm going to say, yep, a very good product. I'm going to look at 2 different kinds, cone bottom in these gallon sizes. And if I'm larger than that, I'm going to be looking for a sloped floor. And so for me, when it comes down to it, I'm going to go with the poly, less expensive, pretty versatile product. And if I'm going above 11,000, I'm going to go with fiberglass with the slope floor because of cost. The stainless products are very good. They're very pricey, but every so often, the difference between fiberglass, poly fiberglass, and stainless gets a lot closer. So depend on when you're buying the products.
Okay.
So my last couple
So-
slides here is this.
We've talked about different kinds of tanks and construction, and we talked about design, we talked about volumes and stuff, and this is a great example here of all of them together. One of the reasons that we chose not to use mild steel, what you call carbon steel, is for the corrosion. And if you would look into this tank, you would see that it's highly corroded after a lot of years, and you can also see on the tank that we got issues with rust, okay? And we've had leaks actually coming out of the tank through the metal. Because some of these micronutrients are in fact very corrosive, those we don't use. What we would prefer under these size tanks, and you can see right here is 12.
Okay, we're going to give it just 1 second. We'll see if it just moves along by itself, but I'll explain it. There is your poly tank.
26 for the sulfur product here. And you can see here the poly. Poly is our #1 choice on the smaller tanks. Let's say under 11,000, 12,000, depending on what you can get. And you can also see that it has a cone bottom. And that's crucial. That allows some of these products that settle to be able to pump it.
Well, we're having a problem transmitting. That's okay. In the back are fiberglass tanks. And I was going to make the point here. These are two great tanks. The flat bottom tanks of poly would work as well. And again, if you have them, they would work as long as they're 1.5. But I can't clean these out like I can in other containers. So again, I'm down to a handful of tanks. And then obviously the way to really know is to ask your tank distributor and your provider. Once you've got your thoughts together and you know what you're going to be purchasing or bringing in onto the farm storing them and what kind of tanks you're actually looking for, you can do the matching. Again, I'd like to see you make sure you flush your systems out. If especially a lot of you here are buying packaged material, just flush it out when you're done with your micronutrients, just like you would lots of other products. This is the publication that's currently under development. Actually, it's written. I'm putting in the edits as we speak. It's fixing to go out for national review. And it has a lot of the things plus more than what we've talked about here. If you're interested, there is my email, fwhitford@purdue.edu. You can send me an email and I would be glad to put you on the list. I'll give you a free copy when they come out. If you're interested in reviewing this, especially if you disagree with something, so two things. If you would like to review it, please send me an email and I'll send it to you. You'll have 6 weeks to look at it. And I'm specifically interested in folks that have questions that I didn't address. If you could send that to me email or give it to your extension educator. If you have disagreements with what I said, I'm also interested in that just to see where the angle that you're coming from, to see if I agree with you. And if I do, then I'm going to have to modify my talk and or the publication. So again, we're all learning. Like you, we learn as we go. So with that, Andrew, I will stop sharing. I think I can, right? And see, I'm going to, isn't that there's a great picture. Unfortunately, a tank that goes bad, somebody, this is up at Brookston. I thought that this is going to be the back cover of the publication. So I'm going to stop sharing, Andrew, and ask across the different audiences in the county offices whether there's any questions that or comments that anybody would have. And Andrew, if you can monitor the chat in case some of our people online might have questions.
We have a question, Andrew. Just a moment.
Can I talk now?
Yes.
Okay. This goes back, I don't know, I'm about 100 years old, and this goes back about 50 years. But I remember a process where they took mild steel. Now you'd have to go to the manufacturer, you take mild steel and you purge it with nitrogen and elevate the temperature, and you create an iron oxide protection around that steel that is superior to almost any other protection I've seen. I can't think of any particular applications now because it's been so many years ago, but I think they used to glue guns, you know, black coating on a gun barrel. I think it's a process they used there for a while. Now that may have changed since then, but
Well, and that could alter. Now, what you just said could alter a couple of things. I don't know, and
Right.
so I don't know, but it makes sense. So what I'll do is I've got my note. I just wrote that down, and let me check with the suppliers, because if that in fact is the case, obviously they have to. It'd be additional cost, but if that's the case, it would allow mild steel to be used as long as you had this process taking place on it, right?
Right.
That's your point. So I can't answer your question, but I've got the question written for me to dig that out to see. Appreciate that comment.
chemical equation that comes to my mind, and this is from memory, is Fe3O4. I think that's what you end up with.
Fe3O4?
Yes, it's a ferrite oxide.
Oxide, okay.
Oh, and
Very
put your name on the patent, would you please, when you write that?
Say it again.
Put my name on the patent when you.
Oh, no, I'm an extension. You don't give credit to nobody. People say, God, how are you so smart? I said, I'm not smart. People like you tell me what I should be doing, and then I have all these options. So I will. And no, sir, you don't want to be associated with anything with me. Your stock goes way down when that happens. So, all right, I appreciate the comment. Any other, Andrew?
I don't see anything in the chat yet. I'll give everybody a moment to relay anything they need.
I will say this, Andrew, to you and your team, how much I appreciate you doing this at this time of the year, because there's a lot of people in this audience that we're going to have to retest without this. And if many of them are like me, they got lucky the first time they passed it, they don't need to push their luck even more. So all of you out there who needed that one extra one before the end of the year, appreciate that this is coming from Extension. We would rather do it live, right, Andrew? But we're adapting the best that we can. So I do
Fred, we
appreciate
had a question.
the team there doing it. Go ahead.
Yeah, the question was asked about the service life of those poly tanks. What's the expected service life?
All right. That's a question we always get. So if you ask the manufacturers, they will not tell you because they can't. Is it a 1.5 tank? Is it a 1.0 tank holding fertilizer, which means it's going to last less? Is it being stored outside, which is going to last less? How many times are you filling that poly tank up and filling it, emptying it, filling it, empty it? If you're putting the poly tank that's round on a truck, then it's not going to last as long. Having said all that, you can expect, off the record, they're telling me 6 years at least before there might be some breakdown. I've got tanks, Jonathan, that are 30 years old and they're still good tanks. So I can't give you a good answer because it depends on how you use them or abuse them. And so, you know, I've got them, again, 30 years, and I've got some like the one that you saw that crash that was, I think those were, my recollection were those were 7 years old.
Any other questions out there?
All right.
Okay.
Andrew, thanks to you and the team again. Appreciate you asking me. Hope we pass some good information collectively, Bill, myself, and Joe Bukovitz. So, all righty.
All right. Yeah, I believe so, Fred. Thank you, and Bill and Joe as well. Certainly our speakers. And again, thanks to our hosts out there in the county. As I said earlier, it's not the easiest thing to bring people together right now. So yeah, I appreciate them doing that. I believe a few of our educators out there may have a quick evaluation for our participants today. If you could give us any feedback on how this went, we would greatly appreciate it, especially as we transition to or continue to transition to this virtual setting. We'd love to hear any feedback, and hopefully you didn't have too many issues on your end. So anyway, I'll let you guys go ahead and do your sign outs and everything, and I'll hang on here for a few more minutes if anything comes up. But again, thanks to everyone who participated today.